Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And of course, we are in Jonah, and I'm sorry, Jonah, in Noah. In Noah. There's a reason for that. At any rate, we're in Noah, and we're coming. The flood is over, and he's looking to see if the waters have dried up sufficiently. So let me just do a quick thing here. Okay. All right. So he sent remember we read how he sent the dove. We read a comment on that. And now we're talking about the dove, how he sent out the dove. Hayona me'ito. He sent the dove me'ito from himself. And that's the word that we're going to focus on for now, because it could have said he just sent the dove. Why does it say he sent the dove from himself? That's the question. And this is the way, this is something perhaps you're getting used to seeing, is how we put this under a magnifying glass, right? And we're like detectives looking for clues for hidden secrets of the Torah. So, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, said Rabbi Yirmiyah, Bikan, from here, Shediratan shel ofot tahorim, that the location of that is to say, where pure birds live, right? He im hatzadikim. It is with the righteous, with the righteous. So, that in itself is sort of an interesting statement. I mean, apart from its literal meaning, right? That pure birds live together with righteous people. Um, what's its significance? That's the question. Do birds have a certain type of symbolism? I mean, I'm aware that there's a tradition that in Abraham and Sarah's habitation, the angels were very present constantly. There was an awareness of the presence of angels in Sarah and Abraham's tent and their habitation, as I said, and that are birds here somehow symbolic of angels because of their wings and their ability to fly? I'm not offhand familiar with the symbolic significance of birds as such. I don't know if one of you is, but I'm just wondering, right? Because it associates birds with righteous people, and that's sort of the
When were wings?
say that again.
When were wings associated with angels?
Aren't they? Well, we certainly read it in
Well,
Ezekiel.
yes, but is that a
read it
Jewish
in
is
Isaiah.
that a Jewish concept and that's where it's from?
Well, I would say it's certainly from those prophetic areas. I don't believe we read about the wings in the Torah. I don't believe that we do, but we do with that vision of both. I think with Isaiah and Ezekiel. I think Ezekiel for absolute sure that he talks about them having wings. But I know that that is a tradition. Um, Part of the idea of an angel, remember the malach basically means a messenger, and the idea, my sense of this whole concept of angels has to do with the notion of divine presence, of trying to have sort of a mediating reality between the ineffability and the transcendence of God and this world. And it's a way of trying to sort of describe a middle place for angels. And angels can either take the form of human beings, but we certainly have in the Torah where it talks about the pillar of fire and the pillar of the pillar of cloud that led the Israelites, that they're referred to as angels as well. So anything that sort of represents a direct connection with the divine is something like that. Let's take a look at Torah Temimah on this. So this is Gimel right here. Darish mi dichtiv me'ito. So this is exactly one point that I made, right? He interprets this because it states in the text me'ito. It has this word from him. Vezeh ha'ma'amar. And he says this little statement that we have, right? Hu behemshech al ha'ma'amar hamuva la'el. And he says this is actually a continuation in the Gemara in Sanhedrin of the statement that's made earlier on up above, the pasuk tachtiim shniim ushlishim, where we're referring to that part where he was building the ark. Noah was building the ark, and he was given the instructions of making lower, middle, and upper levels, right? And at the time we read tachtiim lezevel, the lower regions of the ark. The bowels of the ark were for dung. Emtsayim lebehema. The middle regions were for the animals. Elyonim la'adam, and the third upper region of the ark, the third story of the ark, was for human habitation. Umosif bazeh, right? And so he adds in that statement, he adds regarding that, the Hayona haita ito, that the dove was with the people on the third level. Ve'ulai hu mishum sheken derech ha'eretz. He says, and it's possible that this is something, that doves living in homes was not an uncommon thing. He says that this is sort of the way of the world, that doves tend to live in perhaps the attics and the roofs of homes. So there we go. So he sends out the dove, and the dove comes back, remember, with an olive, ale zayit, right? An olive branch, or ale is actually a leaf, an olive leaf. A naf is a branch, ale is a leaf. So an olive leaf. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, again, Rabbi Yirmiyah, same rabbi we had above, said, my dichtiv, right? What is the significance of this statement in the text, Vehine ale zayit taraf befiha? Just want to make sure I have taraf befiha, that I'm pronouncing it correctly, right? What is the significance of it saying, and behold, an olive leaf was plucked in its mouth? Or the leaf of an olive that had been plucked in her mouth. This is the significance, that there was a message in this, and possibly some of you are already familiar with this. Amra Yona lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The dove said before the Holy One, blessed be He. And again, we don't take this literally. We sort of understand it as from a literary point of view, that of what symbolism is involved here. But we put it in this kind of charming way. Ribono shel olam, master of the universe, Yiyu mizonotai merurim kazayat, let my food, right, be as bitter as an olive, v'hayu misurim biyadcha, but let them be dependent on yours. Let them be placed in your hands. In other words, that you're the one who provides me with this, even though it's bitter. V'al yu metukin kidvash, and let them not be as sweet as honey, utloyin biyad basar vadam, but be dependent on the agency of flesh and blood, meaning human beings. Interesting statement. Right? It's talking about something about the relationship that we have in being that when God, I believe that, at least as I start to think through as to what this is really trying to say, is just on the first level would be to say that what God provides us, although it might be bitter, there are no necessarily expectations involved beyond appreciation, right? And letting our actions reflect the appreciation we have for the fact that they come from a divine source, and that their bitterness might be a temporary bitterness, but the issue is, do they sustain us, right? In some ways, it reminds me of, getting what you need as opposed to getting what you want, right? And sometimes what we need, I should say, what we need is more significant than what we want. And on the other hand, when you become dependent on human beings, there are all kinds of ways in which we now owe them, and sometimes in a very uncomfortable way. And so it might be sweet, but nevertheless, they're bitter in their own way. So Torah Temimah has an interesting take on this, right? So the issue is, he says that this word taraf, right, plucked, lashon mezonot, it has the connotation of food, taraf, kidichtiv, as it says in Proverbs 30, verse 8, hatrifani lechem chuki, right? Basically, it means provide me my apportioned bread, right? In other words, snatch for me. That's so. This word taraf can mean snatched. It is also related to the word treif, right? Which is sort of, it's talking about the initial word. It means torn. So, in other words, to pluck, because when you pluck something, you're tearing it away from its source. So hitrifani is here in this context has the idea of providing food. So but it's the same word as the word for treif. V'katvu but Tosafot, he says, and the Tosafot, we know who they are, right? Rashi's grandchildren. They're found on the page of the Gemara. Deka'e al ilan ha'ilan shel zayit. He says that this hitrifani lechem chuki, right? I believe, right, that it is talking about, or unless, for whom Shehumar. No, I think actually what he's saying is that this is Tosafot's comment in Son head in Eruvin. This is the source is Eruvin, and that the Tosafot said in Eruvin that here in this particular comment, the point that they're making is that it's referring to the olive tree Shehu Mar that is bitter. I do believe that that's what they're referring to. Avalo hazayit atzmo, but not the actual olive. In other words, when it's saying ale zayit, they're saying notice, right, that we are talking about a leaf and not the fruit, not the fruit. And yes, all right. So that's that they're making that point, right, that it's not talking about the olive fruit. V'hashach, the shach is the siftei kohen. It's an abbreviation for this, and I wanted you to know something about the shach. Shach is one of the major commentators on the Shulchan Aruch, and here's something about him. Right, his name was Shabtai ben Meir HaKohen, and 1662 to 1621. So he was a 17th century posek, right? There's the Hebrew, Shabtai ben Meir HaKohen, was a noted 17th century Talmudist and halachist. He became known as the Shach, Hebrew, which is an abbreviation of his most important work, Siftei Kohen, right? Literally lips of the priest on the Shulchan Aruch. And you will find it on the page of a Shulchan Aruch. You'll find him as one of the major commentators on the Shulchan Aruch. At any rate, the point that he's making is, so he's referring to the Siyore Dea, one of the sections of the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Tzadik Vav. So this would be like chapter, this would be 96. Sif Katan Kaf. This would be paragraph 20. That's the way it's subdivided. Hevin Hamamar Kepashte. He understood this statement. This is the statement in the Talmud. Kepashte, he says, so he says, let me make sure, simply on its literary level, right? Because it says Marim Kazayit, right? And the Tosafot are saying when it says like an olive, they want you to understand they don't mean an olive itself as the fruit, but rather from an olive tree, right? The leaf of an olive tree, right? He understands it, Deka'e al hazayit atzmo. So he understands that statement there as referring to the fruit, right? The actual olive itself. Ulefela, and Torah Temimah is saying it's amazing. Shekatav hefech divrei HaTosafot, that here he is writing just the opposite of what the Tosafot are saying. The Tosafot are making a point to say it's not the fruit; it is simply the leaf of the olive tree. Right, when it says Zayat there, what the dove was saying, and not the fruit. And here the Siftei Kohen writes just the opposite. All right, now it's one thing if he has an opinion like like that. That's sort of interesting as it is. But it says, right, Hatosofo bimkumam, right there. V'lo hiskiram klal, but he doesn't mention them at all. He doesn't mention that he is disagreeing with the Tosafot. And you need to understand that the fact that the Tosafot are Rishonim, they wrote prior to the compiling of the Shulchan Aruch. The compiling of the Shulchan Aruch marks a notable moment in Jewish legal history. And so there are those commentators who lived before the compilation of the Shulchan Aruch. They're known, in other words, they basically lived in a period of time following the close of the Talmud and also the time of the Gaonim, right? That are titled as Gaon so and so, and after that they're called Rishonim. So, for example, I believe Maimonides would be considered a Rishon, right? Rashi, a Rishon. His grandchildren, Rishonim, because they come before the Shulchan Aruch. And the ones that follow are called Acharonim, and that takes us into our own present days. So Siftei Kohen is a Acharon, right? He's one of the Acharonim, and he's disagreeing with a Rishon. And an Acharon doesn't have, someone from that generation doesn't have a right to simply disagree without having very good reasons for that disagreement, preferably finding some previous authority who's also a Rishon or earlier than the Rishonim to support their point of view. So there's this sense of precedence in halacha, in Jewish law, and what the point is that Torah Temimah is making here is that here he is specifically disagreeing with a Tosafot, an Acharon, disagreeing with a Rishon, without even mentioning the fact that they said something different. And I think in some ways he's pointing out a human quality to the Siftei Kohen. I mean, there's no question that the Siftei Kohen was a brilliant, brilliant person who had an encyclopedic knowledge of Jewish law, and yet here he misses something. And Tosafot are pretty much, on the front page of these sorts of things. So that's one little sort of interesting footnote. Going on. Uma shira'u chazal lidrosh kacha. So he says, but at the same time, look, this is an interesting drush, right? In other words, trying to understand that, the story of the dove, we know the story, the dove brought an olive leaf. And the question, of course, is this symbolism of bringing the olive leaf to Noah, back to Noah, and saying this particular statement about better my food being bitter but coming from God than my food being sweet but dependent on human agency, right? So what do they see to say this? What's sort of the basis of this statement? Pashutu, it's straightforward, to samchu al masha katuv b'midrash rabbah, that they were depending, right, on, in other words, the sages mentioned in Eruvin were basically following what's written in the Midrash Rabbah, mehechan hevia ha'aleh hazo. So there's a question in the Midrash Rabbah, wait a second, where did this leaf come from? Where did this leaf come from? And why are we asking this? Kevan dehakol nishtaf b'mabul. Because everything basically was swept away or in fact, dissolved, right? Although nishtaf, I don't think usually means, although shituf means connection, it just sort of all got mixed up through the flood, right? So Rabbi Levi Amar, continuing what's said in Midrash Rabbah, Rabbi Levi said, Mehar Hamishcha Hevi'ah Oto, that she brought this particular olive leaf from Har Hamishcha, which is literally, it means the mount of olive oil, right? The mount of anointing oil, and something anointment, and it's referring to the Mount of Olives. That's Haramishcha, right? So she brought this leaf from the Mount of Olives. Rabbi Bevai Amar. So there's some difference of opinion between various rabbis here. They all have their sort of message that they want to bring across. But anyway, Rabbi Bevai said, Sha'arei Gan Eden niftachula. The gates of the Garden of Eden were opened for her. Vehevia oto. And so she brought it from the Garden of Eden. She brought this olive leaf. Amar Rabbi Abahu, said Rabbi Abahu, let's see. Ilo migan Eden he'iva. So Rabbi Abahu has a little bit of a problem with Rabbi Bivai. And he says, if she in fact brought it from the Garden of Eden, oto, lo hayala lahavi davar me'uleh, it doesn't make sense. Bringing something from the Garden of Eden, shouldn't she have brought something much nicer, right? Something much more significant, you might say, right? Or fantastic, terrific, great, something great. Or kinmon, she could have brought a stick of cinnamon, or palsaman, or balsam, something like that, right? And of course, these sort of spices, well, spices are something very precious, and they add something. We talk about the spice of life, right? Something like that, just in terms of what that might suggest. Ella remes rimzalo. But the reason she didn't, so he's not necessarily disagreeing with the Garden of Eden issue, but the reason she didn't bring something much more, say, representative of the Garden of Eden is because she wanted to give him an illusion, give Noah an illusion, make an allusion to Noah. Amar la, Amar le Noach, and she said to Noah, Mutav marze, this bitter thing is better mitachat yado shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that came at the hands of the Holy One, blessed be He, on the agency of the Holy One, blessed be He, velo matok mitachat yadcha, and not something sweet from your hands, from your hands. But he kavanat hagmora, and this, in fact, is the point of the Gemara here. Okay, so whether it came from the Har HaZeitim or whether it came from Gan Eden, there was saying that it came from Gan Eden. Again, Rabbi Abahu is clarifying perhaps what Rabbi Bivai is trying to say as well, that she wanted to make a point with Noah. And of course, it's a point for us to absorb. Omnam, however, ma shetamhu bichlal, but the fact that the rabbis were questioning at all, me'ayin lakha ha'aleh shel zayit, where did she take, or where did she get this olive leaf? Acharei da'akol nishtaf b'babul, since everything was basically swept away by the flood. Lichora, efshar le'ashev b'pshitut. One on the surface, it's possible to solve this problem on a simple level. Al pi tosefta. This is by what is written in the Tosefta, not to be confused with Tosafot. The Tosefta is basically a contemporary work that contains many Mishnaic kinds of statements that were not included in the Mishnah itself. But we're talking about many halachic statements, laws, etc., that were collected and put in the Tosefta. Again, okay, that add a lot and explain many other issues of Jewish law. But it's
Why
contemporary.
weren't
Yes. Yes, go
why
ahead.
weren't they continued? Why weren't they included?
Good question, Judith. That's a great question. So I can answer it, I think, on some levels. And that is that there may have been some disagreements regarding those particular rulings. Okay. The other thing is, remember, why did Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi decide to commit the oral law to writing? Remember, this was all oral law up to that point. And why was he doing that? He was doing that to try and make sure, even though it would have been forbidden under normal circumstances to commit the oral law to writing, he was worried that the Romans were preventing Jews from studying. And if they were not able to study on the level that they had up to that point, the oral law would be forgotten. And so since he knew that he was basically contravening the law, going against the law as it had originally been stated, but because it was sha'at hadchak, it was an emergency situation, he would want to make it as brief as possible, and basically as a memory aid. That's the way he did it. So he needed to choose those laws that he felt would assist the scholars, the Jewish scholars and halachists, to be able to create the law as it stood. And that's the best answer I can give you for now. Please comment if you wish.
How is information from the Tosefta dealt with by those studying Talmud?
So there are many statements, okay, statements that are not actually included in the Mishnah have a technical term applied to them. They're known as a baraita. The word baraita in Aramaic means outside, and it's referring to a halachic statement that is not found in the Mishnah. And the Talmud, part of the Talmud's technical language is that they will use a phrase, okay, like for example when they say tnan, when they introduce a halachic statement with the word tnan, it means found in the Mishnah, that the statement that follows is in the Mishnah. On the other hand, if it's from a baraita, they will say tanya. They will use that term. There are many baraitot found in the Talmud that are actually quotations from the Tosefta. And in sifting through this material, the Talmud then starts to get it. What it's trying to do is to help us, to give us a method by which to be able to practice divine law, practice mitzvot in as perfect a way as possible. And so baraitot are used. There are baraitot that are not found in the Tosefta, that are found in the Talmud. But as I said, many of these baraitot are found in the Tosefta itself.
When I hear that in Chabad they study Tanya, is that the same Tanya?
No, no. But it's the Tanya is actually a work that was written and composed by the founder, okay, of the Chabad sect of Hasidim, and it is considered by Chabad Hasidim to be a holy book. The reason why it's called the Tanya is based, you know that in many times Hebrew chapter titles or book titles are taken from the first significant word of the chapter or the book. So, for example, we call the book of Genesis in Hebrew Bereshit because that's the first word of the book. Likewise, this book is also starts off with the word Tanya. That's the way it starts. And it quotes a certain baraita, which has to do with a classification of people in terms of their righteousness. And so that's the connotation of Tanya for Lubavitcher Hasidim. So, yeah, but it is definitely connected to what we're talking about. So they start off by quoting this baraita. Okay? So thank you. Those are wonderful questions. Okay, so here we go. We're saying that everything was basically destroyed by the flood. And so that's why they're asking this question. Where was this dove? Where was she able to find an olive leaf, right? If everything was destroyed, right? Okay. So that's a good question, right? And that Heviu HaTosafot Begitin. So they're saying that the Tosafot quote a Tosefta in the tractate Gitin in the Talmud, right? Page 21b, Gabe Haditnan, that which is mentioned in the Mishnah, Tnan, notice Tnan, right? Ditnan Sham, there is a Mishnah that says in Gittin, right, in the tractate Gittin, that deals with writing a bill of divorcement, right? Kotvin get al ale shel zayit, that one can actually write a bill of divorce on an olive leaf, right? I mean, obviously, an olive leaf isn't very big, but we'd have to say, if you somehow made a bunch of olive leaves all together, you could write on them. But I mean, it's more the principle of the thing, I believe, that they're talking about than the practicality. And you'll see what's going on here in a second. I'll do my best here. Okay, here we go. Al kol davar shehu al shel kayama. This is the point they're really making, that you can write a get. The question, they break it down, right? They deconstruct every element of writing a get. And the issue now is, there are going to be questions of what ink can you use, what paper can you use, what parchment can you use, what can you write a get on? And as long as it's something that's enduring. In other words, and so clearly the idea is that an olive leaf doesn't dry up and crumble away. Okay? That's why they're saying you can write it on an olive leaf. In other words, anything that's enduring. Ita al ze batosefta v'zeh halashon. And okay, so they bring it, they refer then to the Tosefta with this language, quote, in other words, quoting. Davka ale shel zayit. So that when they're saying in the Mishnah that you can write a get on an olive leaf, we're talking about specifically an olive leaf. Shemit kayem. Why? Because it's enduring. Aval ale shel krishin, but leaves of leeks, uvetzalim, and leaves of onions, va'ale, va'ale v'radim, and rose leaves, okay, va'ale yirakot, and other vegetable leaves, right, the leaves of vegetables, pasul. If you wrote a get on something like that, it's not a valid get. It isn't a valid get. It has to be written on something that is enduring, adkan, and that's the end of the quote. Okay, so mevu'ar mizit, it becomes clear from this, שלעלה של זית יש תכונת מיוחדת, that an olive leaf has an unusual, a unique property, she'ena nifsedet, that it doesn't get smaller, right? It doesn't shrivel. Ve'im kain, and if this is the case, halo efshar kan lomar, so if that is the case, it's possible to say here, shelo nishtafa b'mabul, that it didn't get all destroyed in the flood. Ach im kolze, but nevertheless, having said all there, kasher lomar kain. Okay, let me make sure I move this. But he says there's still some difficulty in making that kind of statement. Lefi manda amar, because it goes on to say, b'midrashim, in midrashim, shigam ilanot ne'karu mimkomam, that trees were uprooted from their place, ve'itztroblin shel rechaim namuchu, and not only that, lower millstones they sort of melted, they dissolved b'mabul, in the flood. V'avanim namku, and stones decayed. V'hayu lemayim, and they became water. They dissolved. Ukadoma, and similar kinds of statements. And if that's the case, ein svara, you can't argue shekol kach tiyeh azah v'kasha tchunata shel alei zayid, if lower millstones and entire trees and things like that were dissolved in the flood. How are we arguing that an olive leaf managed to survive, right? Shetit kayem. Gam b'makom shenichravu kol advarim ha'ela. In a place, in a situation where all these other things were destroyed. The imkain, if this is the case, Shapir Maksheh Midrash Rabbah, and if this is all the case, the difficulty that the Midrash Rabbah is raising, Me'ein lakcha ha'aleh shel zayit, from where did she take this olive leaf? Is Shapir. It's outstanding. It's a great question. They have every right to ask that question given all this background. Now, Having said that, here's Mordechai Miller, whose knowledge sort of would fit on the tiniest fingernail of the Torah Temimah. But I'm aware of a tradition, please note down here, and I believe it was mentioned, that Eretz Yisrael wasn't affected by the flood, that it wasn't affected by the flood. And if that's the case, when the rabbi said that she took the olive leaf from the Mount of Olives, makes good sense. This is good sense. So if I'm understanding Torah Temimah correctly, I am surprised that he doesn't mention that particular point. So you never know. So with that, I will stop the share. If there's anybody wants to say anything else, you're welcome. It's fun. So you never know. Well, thank you.